पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत। औज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम। बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम। यासीन वल कुरानिल हकीम इन्नका लमिनल मुरसलीन अला सिरातिम मुस्तकीम। तंज़ीलल अज़ीज़िर रहीम लितुन्ज़िरा कौमन मा उन्ज़िरा आबाहुम फहुम गाफ़िलून। लक़द हक़्क़ल क़ौलु अला अक्सरिहिम फ़हुम ला युमिनून। इन्ना जअलना फ़ी अनाक़िहिम अग़लालन फ़हियल अस्कानि फ़हुम मुक़महून। वजअलना मिन बैनि अयदीहिम सद्दन वमिन ख़ल्फ़िहिम सद्दन फ़अग़शयनाहुम फ़हुम ला युबसिरून। वसवाउन अलैहिम अंज़रतहुम अम लम तुनज़िरहुम ला युमिनून। इन्नमा तुनज़िरु मन इत्तबअ ज़िक्र व ख़शिय रहमान बिलग़ैब फ़बश्शिरहु बिमग़फ़िरतिन व अज्रिन करीम। इन्ना नहनु नुह्यिल मौता व नक्तुबु मा क़द्दमू व आसारहुम व कुल्ल शैइन अहसैनाहु फ़ी इमामिम मुबीन। वज़रिब लहुम मसलन अस्हाबल क़र्यह इज़ जाअल मुरसलून इज़ अरसलना इलैहिम इस्नैनि फ़कज़्ज़बूहुमा फ़अज़ज़ना बिसालिसिन फ़क़ालू इन्ना इलैकुम मुरसलून। क़ालू मा अंतुम इल्ला बशरुन मिस्लुना वमा अंज़लर रहमानु मिन शै इन अंतुम इल्ला तक्ज़िबून। क़ालू रब्बुना यअलमु इन्ना इलैकुम लमुरसलून वमा अलैना इल्लल बलाग़ुल मुबीन। क़ालू इन्ना ततय्यरना बिकुम लइन लं तंतहू लनरजुमन्नकुम वलमस्सन्नकुम मिन्ना अज़ाबुन अलीम। क़ालू ताइरुकुम माअकुम अइन ज़ुकिरतुम बल अंतुम क़ौमुन मुस्रिफ़ून। वजाअ मिन अक़सल मदीनति रजुलुन यसअ क़ाल या क़ौमि इत्तबिउल मुरसलीन। इत्तबिउ मा ला यसअलुकुम अज्रन वहुम मुहतदून। वमा लिया ला अब्दुल्लज़ी फ़तरनी व इलैहि तुरजऊन। अत्तख़िज़ु मिन दूनिही आलिहतन इन युरीदिर रहमानु बिज़ुर्रिन ला तुग़नि अन्नी शफ़ाअतुहुम शैयअन व ला युनक़िज़ून। इन्नी इज़न लफ़ी ज़लालिम मुबीन। इन्नी आमनतु बिरब्बिकुम फ़स्मऊन। क़ील उद्ख़ुलिल जन्नह क़ाल या लैत क़ौमी यअलमून बिमा ग़फ़र ली रब्बी वजअलनी मिनल मुकरमीन। वमा अंज़लनाहु अला क़ौमिही मिन बअदिही मिन जुन्दिन मिनस समाई वमा कुन्ना मुनज़िलीन। इन कानत इल्ला सय्यतन वाहिदतन फ़इज़ा हुम ख़ामिदून। या हसरतन अल इबाद मा यातीहिम मिन रसूलिन इल्ला कानू बिही यस्तहज़िऊन। अलम यरौ कमा अहलकना क़ब्लहुम मिनल क़ुरूनि अन्नहुम इलैहिम ला यरजिऊन। व इन कुल्लुन लम्मा जमीउन लदैना मुहज़रून। वआयतुन लहुमुल अर्ज़ुल मैता अह्यैनाहा व अख़रजना मिन्हा हब्बन फमिन्हु याकुलून। वजअलना फ़ीहा जन्नातिन मिन नख़ीलिन व अनाबिन वफ़ज्जरना फ़ीहा मिनल उयून लियाकुलू मिन समरिही वमा अमिलतहु अयदीहिम अफ़ला यशकुरून। सुब्हानल्लज़ी ख़लक़ल अज़वाज कुल्लहा मिम्मा तुंबितुल अर्ज़ु व मिन अनफुसिहिम व मिम्मा ला यअलमून। वआयतुन लहुमुल लैलु नस्लख़ु मिन्हु अन्नहार फ़इज़ा हुम मुज़लिमून। वश्शम्सु तजरी लिमुस्तक़र्रिन लहा ज़ालिक तक़दीरुल अज़ीज़िल अलीम। वल्क़मर क़द्दरनाहु मनाज़िल हत्ता आद कल्उरजूनिल क़दीम। लश्शम्सु यंबग़ी लहा अन तुद्रिकल क़मर वल्लैलु साबिक़ुन नहार व कुल्लुन फ़ी फ़लकिन यस्बहून। वआयतुन लहुम अन्ना हमलना ज़ुर्रियतहुम फ़िल फ़ुल्किल मशहून व ख़लक़ना लहुम मिन मिस्लिही मा यरकबून। व इन नशअ नुग़रिक़हुम फ़ला सरीख़ लहुम व ला हुम युनक़ज़ून। इल्ला रहमतन मिन्ना व मताअन इला हीन। व इज़ा क़ील लहुम इत्तक़ू मा बैना अयदीकुम व मा ख़ल्फ़कुम लअल्लकुम तुरहमून। وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين. وإذا قيل لهم انفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين. ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون. ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون. قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون. فاليوم لا تجزون نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم أزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم. وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أهد إليكم يا بني آدم أن لا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم. ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون. هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون. اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون. ولو نشاء لتمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون. ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون. ومن نعمره ننكس في الخلق أفلا يعقلون. وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين. أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون. واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون. فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون. أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين. وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقا قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحيي الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم. الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون. أو ليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى هو الخلاق العليم. إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون. فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك الإثم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك واستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع متضرع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانيا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك ولا مكانك وخفي مكرك وزهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد للذنوب غافرا ولا لقبائه ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترت وكم من فاده من البلاء يقلت وكم من إثار وقيت وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرت. اللهم عظم بلائي وعفرت بي سوء حالي وكسرت بأعمالي وقادت بأغلالي وحبسني النفي بعد عملي وخدتني الدنيا بغرورها والنفس بجنايتها ومثالي يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور يطوفا إلهي وربي من لغيرك أسأله كشف ذري والنظر في أمري إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكم اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أحوى وأسأله على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك وخالفت بعد أوامرك فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي في قضاءك وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في ساعة من رحمتك اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ذري وفكني من شد وثاقي يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عزمي يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي هبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي أتراك معذب بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد ما انطوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تزيي من ربيت أو تبعد من أدنيت أو تشرد من آويت أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمت وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادحا وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا وعلى ضمائر رحوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة ولا جوارها سات الأوطان تعبدك طايا وأشارت باستغفارك مذئنا ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرن بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا ربي. وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، لا أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثو يسير بقاء كثير مدة. فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدة ويدوم مقام ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك، وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما من هذا الجوع أبكي، لعليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته. فلئن سيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فحبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك، وحبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك، أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك. فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لازجن إليك بين أهلها زجيج العاملين، ولا أصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولا أبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولا أنادينك إن كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية أعمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفتي، وذاك طعم عذابها بمعصيتي، وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرتي، وهو يزج إليك زجيج مؤمل لرحمتك، ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك، ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي فكيف يبكى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك ورأفتك، أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يعمل فضلك ورحمتك، أم كيف يهركه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه، أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه، أم كيف يتكلكل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه، أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه، أم كيف يرجو فضلك في يتكه منها فتتركه فيها. هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما عملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك. فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاهديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملاها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي أتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته وأخفيته وأظهرته وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بإثم ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جواره وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترت وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته أو إحسان فضلت أو بر نشرته أو رزق بسطته أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك ركي يا من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بزر ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورا وبخدمتك موصولا وأعمالي إنك مقبولا حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب قوي على خدمتك جواره واشدد على العزيمة جوانه وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أسراها إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في المبارزين وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين واجتمع بجوارك مع المؤمنين اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فارد ومن قادني فكد واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وخصهم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجد لي بجودك وعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأكلني عثرتي واغفر زلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وزمنت لهم الإجابة فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لدعائي وبلغني منايا ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى ارحم من راس ماله الرجاء واستلاؤه البكاء يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النقام يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم يا عالم لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بما أنت أهله وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani, respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Al-Fatiha is requested for the Isar al-Sawab of Marhumeen listed on the screen, and for all Marhumeen, Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman. Ayyama Yujib is requested for the Isar Sawab. Ayyama Yujib is requested for the names listed on the screen and for all those in need here and elsewhere. Let us recite together. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Amma yujibul mutawwa idha da'a wa yakshifu as-su'. Amma yujibul mutawwa idha da'a wa yakshifu as-su'. أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. This year, we are privileged to have Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani and Sheikh Muhammad Al-Hilli as our guest speakers throughout the month. We will also have world-renowned reciter Al-Hajj Abathar Al-Halawachi grace us for the last 15 nights, with eloquent recitations of dua. Don't miss out on the great opportunity to immerse yourself in spirituality. Programs for Ramadan will start on Saturday with Maghrib Salat and Potluck Iftar, after which we will have Dua Iftitah and the first of Ramadan lectures by Sayyid Shabbir. From Sunday onwards, programs will start at 7:30 p.m. with Dua Iftitah and Maghribain Salat, after which we will have Iftar and the daily lecture. For the full schedule, please refer to our weekly newsletter and our WhatsApp broadcast. Also, ladies will have darsa every day starting Saturday, April 2nd at 7 p.m. Ramadan programs. This Ramadan we will have a variety of activities and programs organized by our committees, some of which are shown on the screen. All of these activities are geared towards creating spirituality and nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we encourage you and your families to participate and immerse yourselves in these activities. For more details and to sign up for them, kindly refer to our weekly newsletter. Jazakallah. We will also be having the youth trivia night on Saturday, April 2nd after the main program. This will be for ages 12 to 25, and they will be creating teams for these. It will be a fun activity for all the youth in the dining hall. Snacks and desserts will be served. We ask all the youth to RSVP to the number on the screen. Finally, we would like to take an opportunity to thank all our sponsors for the support as we prepare for the month of Ramadan. Our budget for the entire month is $143,350. There are many opportunities to support your masjid, including sponsorship of iftar, tabarruk, hadiah for the speakers, as well as the general Ramadan fund. We suggest a donation of $250 per family for the Ramadan fund. However, any amount is welcome. Please contact Brother Murtaza Kareem, Brother Jabir Chattu, or Sister Batul Mukhi at the number on the screen, or Zelle to donate@masjidhayy.org, or go to our website's payment center to make a donation. Thank you very much, and Jazakallah to all the people who have donated so far. At this time, I would like to invite Sayyid Shabbir to recite tonight's majlis with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
If you could please recite Surah Al-Fatiha for the marhumin of the Mirza family, as well as for marhum Mahmoud Al-Ta'i, and for your marhumin, and for our marhumin, for all those who do not have someone to recite Al-Fatiha for them. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوضوا أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين صدق الله العلي العظيم زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد. My respected scholars, elders, brothers and sisters in Iman here in Florida, across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question, what was the experience of the Holy Prophet like in Sham or Damascus? Keep that question in the back of your mind. We've been discussing the life and times of the Holy Prophet on the basis that we said that the life of Rasulullah is very important for us to understand so that we know the true story of Islam, so that we know the true history of Islam, so that we know what true Islam really is. Rather, that we don't come forward and say that Islam is this and Islam is that based on hearsay, based on what I hear from this person or I hear from that person. What is the story of Islam as taught by the life and times of Rasulullah? How can we understand it? And we said there's a few reasons why we need to know this conversation and why it's so important. Number one, we said as a Muslim, I should know the life and times of Rasulullah. So I know the history of Islam and I know what Islam truly is. I should also know it, number one, for this reason. Number two, I should also know it so that I can respond and inform properly those who may not be Muslims. Those people who are Christians, who are Jews, who are Hindu, who are Sikh, who are not followers of Islam. They may have heard something about Rasulullah, but that may not be the true answer. That may not be the true solution of the matter. That may not be the reality of the matter. It's based on what they have heard or read somewhere. As we gave the example of where did this notion of Islamophobia begin. Islamophobia began in the West, especially in the last 200 to 250 years, when Voltaire wrote his play called Muhammad, where he was criticizing the Catholic Church, but people didn't know that, they didn't realize that. The proof I gave last week was that when he wrote his play called Muhammad, criticizing the Catholic Church, he used an isti'ara. He never used the name of the Catholic Church. But as soon as he put this out in France, the church banned his play from being done in the theater. Why would the Catholic Church stop a play that was putting Rasulullah, the Prophet of Islam, in a negative light? It was clear that they understood he was not criticizing Muhammad, he was criticizing the Catholic Church, so they banned it. But what happened? When they banned it, this same play went over to London and went to the newly formed United States, and when it went to the newly formed United States, it took off like wildfire. But no one remembered why he had written it originally. He had not written it originally to criticize Rasulullah. By the way, Voltaire was not a fan of Rasulullah. Voltaire himself was a victim to the information that he got. Those who are in technology and IT, those who are in engineering, they will know this term better than others in computer science. There's a term called garbage in, garbage out. That is, what information that you feed into the algorithm, into the data processor, if the quality of that information is not good, the output will also not be good. What information Voltaire got was bad information from the get-go. So if Voltaire got bad information about Rasulullah, his output was automatically bad. But we said, and we gave the example, there were other people who understood and read Rasulullah from the Western perspective in an unbiased fashion. For example, who? For example, H.G. Wells, who I've been mentioning for the past several weeks. When he wrote his history, the one who wrote War of the Worlds, that became a movie in Hollywood as well, when he wrote his history of the world, he said Muhammad was the first one to bring liberty, equality, and fraternity, the slogans of the French Revolution, to the world. But he brought it in the 6th century, not in the 18th century like France brought it. So he brought it well before, 1200 years before. So this is something you and I must be mindful for. And the third reason we said why we should know the maqam of Mustafa, the life of Rasulullah and Islam at large, is to respond to other Muslims who may not know the position of Rasulullah today. Today, if you went back only a few decades, maybe 50 years, maybe 60 years, less than that even, you would find that if you were commemorating the Mawlid, the birth of Rasulullah, you would find that every Muslim had uniformity on this, and they said this is something that should be celebrated and commemorated. But today somehow it's become a bid'ah, somehow it has become an innovation, because somehow some new wahi came in the last 50 years when people came to the West. The reality is we need to understand the position of Rasulullah. Yes, Rasulullah is not Allah. Allah is Allah. Rasulullah is below Allah. No doubt about it. There's no debate on this. But for you and I to say that Rasulullah is on my level and your level, that's also not justice to Rasulullah. That is injustice to Rasulullah. Therefore, we must understand that this person is the most immaculate creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When people begin to poke holes into the personality of Rasulullah, they're really poking holes into the fabric of Islam. And at that point in time, they're beginning to try to say, this person was fallible. How do you know that your book that you have, how do you know it's authentic? Maybe he made a mistake. And some rulings and narrations within Muslim books, they have forgotten the maqam of Rasulullah, the position of Rasulullah. Nonetheless, keeping all of these things in mind, it's very important for us to try to focus and emphasize ourselves on understanding the position of Rasulullah so we understand what is true Islam. Moving that conversation along, I want to quickly, number one, recap what we discussed last week, number one. Number two, I then want to move the conversation forward, coming to the years of Rasulullah's life from 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, up to the age of 12 roughly. What happened in this time frame of Rasulullah's development? At number three, who was taking care of Rasulullah primarily during this period? Who are the personalities and who was the person who was most at the forefront of this time looking after the life of Rasulullah? Number 4, what was the environment where Rasulullah traveled from Mecca? Where did he travel to? And when he traveled there, what was his experience like there in that environment and that time? And what lessons can you and I draw from this migration or this movement or this travel, I should say, of Rasulullah to these places? And finally, what was the treatment of the Ahlul Bayt when they went to these same localities years later? This is our agenda for tonight. Wherever you are, here in Florida, or wherever you're hearing my voice, from the bottom of your heart, send a salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the first level, we left off saying that 6 months before the birth of Rasulullah in Amul Fil, before that, 6 months before his father passed away on the way back from a business trip. When he passed away in Medina. And afterwards, 6 months later, Rasulullah was born, meaning he never saw his father physically in his lifetime, number 1. And then when he was born, he was immediately in the presence of his mother. But as was the custom amongst the Bedouin Arabs at that time, is that they would shift the child, those who are able to, they would shift the child to the outskirts of the city of Mecca. They did not want the child to grow up in Mecca. Why? We gave several reasons just very quickly. They did not want, there were many diseases that were in the city. Till this day, viruses, bacteria, illnesses, they spread very quickly in densely populated locations, densely populated cities, number 1. So they didn't want illnesses. Number 2, Arabic language. They wanted the purity of the Arabic language. As we said, in cities, language gets changed. It's not in its purest form. This is true today, it was true then. So they wanted the purest form of Arabic, so they shifted their children outside of the city for this reason. The Bedouins spoke pure Arabic. The third reason was that the life of the desert was a tough life. It was not an easy life. It was a difficult life. So they said that if they live the difficult life in the outskirts of the city, when they come back to the city, life will be a little bit easier. They'll say, this is not such a big deal. Perhaps we need to do this in our world today. In our world, sometimes things are so conveniently given to us that if something was removed from us, then we will say, oh my God, how can I live without it? We get so accustomed to it. For example, chargers and these first world problems that I've talked about. That, for example, my battery is dying on my phone, my cable is 3 feet, the charging cable is 6 feet. I have to stand up and go get there. This is a big problem for certain people. But if you go to other places in the world, Africa, India, other places, they don't have water to drink. So these problems become no problems at all. In fact, you want to know an example of this? The Stoics, 2,000-year-old philosophy of ancient Greece. The Stoics were those people, the likes of Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and others. They came forward and said, look, once a year, they would live their entire day like the poorest person in society. They would live wearing the poorest clothes, eating the most humble of food. They said, why are you doing this? They said, we're doing this for one particular reason. We notice everyone in our society is living in such a fear. Fear of what? Fear of poverty, that what happens if I become poor? So we want to live like the poor for one day. And then we realize it's not that bad. As in, they're human beings like us. We feel a sense of empathy and we feel a sense that we will be able to endure. This is also one of the philosophies of Shahr Ramadan. Shahr Ramadan, one of the foremost reasons why Allah embedded this, especially if your friends ask you, if your colleagues ask you, if your classmates ask you, what is this Ramadan about? What is this month of fasting about? It's not just about staying away from food and drink. That's important. That's one element. The most important element of the equation is self-control of the nafs, as well as feeling empathy for the other person. How do they feel? In America, the average net worth of the individuals who are in Congress, the median, I should say, net worth is $1 million net worth, not their salary. If that person's net worth is 1 million, and I'm someone who's on the ground floor, and I get one accident, I get one mechanical problem with my car, I get one paycheck missed because I'm ill, I have one burden. The average American cannot come up with $300 if they have an extra expense week to week. The average American lives paycheck to paycheck. If I'm someone who's an elected representative, and I'm a millionaire, how do I feel the empathy of that person? This was the concept within Islam, that when you fast, it's not just about staying away from food and drink, that's important, but you also feel the pain of someone else who's having to do that day in and day out outside of the month of Ramadan. You know, and I know that alhamdulillah, because of the people that have made the arrangements, there'll be a beautiful iftar here every night, alhamdulillah. But some people don't have that luxury knowing that they will have food at the end of the day. They're still fasting. Don't become so detached. That was the principle. That was the essence of what was going on with respect to this. Now coming back to this, when we come to Rasulullah and his life, this connection with Rasulullah, he spends, and he comes back after he's born, he spends much of his time outside of the city, roughly the first 6 years of his life. When he's brought under the care of Bibi Halima as-Sa'diyah, when he is under the care of Bibi Halima as-Sa'diyah, who looks after him, she says, we got blessings in our life from this young child Muhammad that we never got from anyone else. And our whole tribe benefited from him. But after the age of 6 roughly, he came back to Mecca. When he came back, and he used to make trips back and forth in between as well, periodically. But at 6 he came back to his mother. When he came back to his mother, as you remember and recall, when he came back at the age of 6, they went then from Mecca towards Medina. Why? Because to visit the family was there, and also the grave of the father of Rasulullah, Hazrat Abdullah, that was there in Medina. And they visited that very emotional moment, and afterwards they return. When they return on the way back, they stop in a place called Abwa. The mother of Rasulullah gets ill there. Bibi Amina, she gets ill. When she gets ill, she passes away in Abwa. Abwa is, we remember, where the 7th Imam was born, Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. She dies in Abwa. Rasulullah's father in Medina, mother in Abwa. And eventually Rasulullah is brought back. When he's brought back, he's in the custody of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib was over 100 years of age, according to narrations, 100 or more. And at that point in time, he's on his deathbed. He looks after the child for a couple of years. And then on his deathbed, he brings his son Abu Talib. And he says, my son Abu Talib, his father, referring to Rasulullah, Prophet Muhammad, he says, this child, his father is not here in this world. However, his father and your mother, his mother and your mother, that is, that the mothers are the same, your mothers, Abdullah and Abu Talib, the mothers are the same between the two. That means you two are the closest. You are brothers, Abdullah and Abu Talib. He is therefore your nephew. Look after him as if he is your own. Abdul Muttalib is saying this to Abu Talib. Look at this child as if he's your own child. And at that point in time, Abu Talib says, my father, I will look after him as if he's my own child, even better. He hugs him, he kisses him, Hazrat Rasulullah, and he looks after him in such a way that perhaps no one looks after him. Now picking it up from here. The narrations say that roughly about the age of 9 or 10 or 11, Rasulullah is under the guidance of Abu Talib. Now at that point in time, a very famous moment that happens according to the history books is, there is a drought in Mecca. When there's a drought in Mecca, it was very customary for people, even at that time, to try to pray. Either they would pray to their idols. As I told you, the people in that environment in Mecca, there were different groups. There were people who were idolaters, there were people who were Hunafa, there were other groups. Hunafa were those people who were monotheists, who were following from the line of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So they were people who used to pray to the idols, there were people who used to be mawahids. All of the ancestors of Rasulullah were at a minimum Hunafa. Nonetheless, they were praying, no rain, no rain, no rain. Up until the point the people came, they said, let's ask Abu Talib to do dua. Why? Because he was from the Hunafa, he was from the line of Ibrahim alayhi salam. It was well known that these were the custodians of the Kaaba. After Abdul Muttalib, Abu Talib is at the forefront. So they come forward and they say, they all gather, the whole city of Mecca gathers, and they come to the house and the door of Abu Talib. At that point in time, they say, Abu Talib, you know it has not rained, there's been a drought, there's been famine, things have been very difficult. As you can imagine, if there's no rain, there's no food, there's nothing there for people. We want you to pray to your Lord. At that point in time, what historians say, and the books of history say, which the whole Muslim world and the world at large should know, is Rasulullah said, rather than me praying, perhaps the more fruitful dua and the more fruitful prayer will be that of my nephews. He says that ask him to pray. He will pray. That is referring to Rasulullah. He says if he prays, it is more likely to be accepted. Now at that point in time, Rasulullah raises his hands, the whole city is there, and he prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and blessings and rain descend on the city of Mecca. At that point in time, Abu Talib, those who ask about the iman of Abu Talib, at that point in time, the narrations say, Abu Talib wrote a qasida at that point in time. He wrote a poem at that time. He wrote a long poem, it is called Qasida Lamia. Lamia, meaning what? It's that Qasida where he has actually given proof of his Iman. Those people who say Abu Talib didn't bring Iman, have you read that Qasida? Have you read where he says at that point in time and he declares the maqam and the position of Rasulullah? But people forget these elements of the equation. Nonetheless, this happened. Then a day or two, weeks passed, months passed, year or two passed. The narrations say there are two different narrations. One is from Shaykh Abbas Qummi and the other is from Allama Majlisi. Shaykh Abbas Qummi, in his view, he gives a shorter, more condensed version. Then I'll give Allama Majlisi's view. This happened either at the age of 9 or at the age of 11, according to Shaykh Abbas Qummi. He says, what happened? Abu Talib was that person who used to look after the visitors to Mecca. Because he was the custodian of the Kaaba, anyone who was coming to the city, he would make sure that he would look after them, feed them, make sure all their needs were taken care of. Of course, as you can imagine, that was expensive. That was not something that was very cheap. So what ended up happening was he used to go do business. He was a well-known merchant and businessman of that time, Abu Talib was. He used to go around the business route, which I mentioned in previous weeks, was the route from Yemen to Sham, Yemen to Damascus. He would go on this route. So he's about to go on the route at this point in time, and at that point in time, according to the narration from Shaykh Abbas Qummi, he's about to leave, and at that point in time, Rasulullah says that my uncle, who will you leave me with? In whose custody will you leave me with while you are gone on this business journey, on this trade journey? And at that point in time, he says, very well, my nephew, you can come with me, you can come along. And he makes the arrangements, and he comes along on the journey with Abu Talib. They go on the route, they go towards Sham. When they get towards Sham, they're getting closer to Sham, right before they get to Damascus, they get to a particular locality. In this particular locality, according to the narrations, lived a monk by the name of Buhaira. This monk was someone who did not leave his monastery every day. He rarely ever left his monastery. He would actually sit in and live a monastic life. Today, many people live like this in monks and monasteries and other places of worship according to their belief system. And so he would sit there and be monastic. He wouldn't speak much, he wouldn't eat much, he wouldn't do much. He would be there in a state of worship as per his belief system. At that point in time, he's looking from his monastery, according to this narration from Shaykh Abbas Qummi, and in the distance he sees a cloud that has formed over a group of people. But he's noticing that as this group of people moves, wherever they move, this cloud also follows that group. That is, that normally you see a cloud, but for the cloud to be following a group of people, they go left, it goes left, they go right. Wherever it goes, the cloud seems to be following. He says, this is astonishing, this is strange, this is different. He notices the group coming closer and closer and closer. At some point in time, he begins to leave his monastery. When he leaves the monastery, he comes outside and he goes to greet towards the caravan of many people, over 100 people. He goes to this caravan, and when he goes to the caravan, he says, I want to invite you all to dinner to my place where I am. Come to the monastery and I will feed you all. They said, very well. They make the arrangements, the invitation is set, the invitation is given. When the invitation is given, at that point in time, the monk, he goes back into his monastery, and when he goes back, he waits, he makes the preparations, and at that point in time, the time comes for the invitation, and the dinner arrangements are made, and he calls all the people, they all come into his monastery, and when they all sit down to eat, at that point in time, he's looking. Now, the sun is about to set. The sun is not quite yet set as of yet, but he notices that same cloud that he saw a few hours earlier, that cloud is still in the distance, it has not come closer. It's over the caravan. So he says, oh my guests, has everyone from your caravan come? Has everyone from your qafila come? He said, yes, everyone's here, everyone's in the qafila. Abu Talib's there, he says, all of our people are there. So are you sure you didn't miss anyone? He said, yes, there's one young child of ours who we've left behind, he's looking after our things. He understood at that point in time. He says, he is to come as well. He needs to come as well. He said, he's just looking after the things. He's just a young boy, roughly 10 years of age. He says, no, he needs to come as well. As soon as the message was sent that he needs to come as well, they sent a messenger. At that point in time, the young child who was left behind, according to Shaykh Abbas Qummi, was Rasulullah. And as soon as he began to come closer to the monastery, the cloud that he was looking at began to move as well. He understood that this was the prophecy that he was looking for. Because this person, Buhaira, he was someone who was a mawahid on the line of the Hunafa. Some say he was a Christian, whether he was a Christian or a monotheist is up for debate. Nonetheless, when he came, he says, this is that young boy that I was looking for. Now this is the point where there's a bit of a divergence between the narration of Shaykh Abbas Qummi, Sahib al-Mafatih al-Janan, and Allama Majlisi, who is of course Sahib Bihar al-Anwar. These are two different views. Now I'm coming to the view of Allama Majlisi. Allama Majlisi at this point in time says he coming back to Mecca before they've set out on the journey. Before they set out on the journey towards Sham, at that point in time a conversation ensues. Rasulullah is a young age, roughly 10 or 11 years of age, and he says to his uncle, you are leaving on a business trip. Who will you leave me with? Will I go with you? Will I go with someone? Will I stay back in the city? Who will you leave me with? Now there's two views here. One view is Abu Talib said, my nephew, of course you are coming with me. There's no doubt whatsoever. Another view was, he wasn't so sure. Of course, Abu Talib was someone who had iman, but circumstances were such. So he said, my nephew, you'll come with me. He brought Rasulullah with him at a young age. And at that point in time, Abu Talib and Rasulullah and all the other people, the narration say 170 people were in this caravan with Abu Talib. When they went, they set out on this journey. Not only was the view, in the other view, that Rasulullah was someone who you'd have to look after. This view says that Rasulullah, because of him, the animals and all the things that they had were getting blessings from Rasulullah's presence. The same way that Bibi Halima was getting blessings from Rasulullah's presence, that she didn't have milk before, then she had milk, and the animals that were there were being taken care of, and they're getting blessings by Rasulullah. Similarly, Abu Talib's caravan was getting blessings from the presence of Rasulullah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Eventually, when they got towards Sham, when they got to Damascus, the same locality, at that point in time, Buhaira, who's in his monastery, he feels a shake. Something like an earthquake happened in his monastery. He said, a shake, an earthquake, the land moving, the ground moving? This has never happened before, what's going on? He remembered the alamat and the signs of the final messenger coming that were in the old scriptures. He said, this is one of the signs. Eventually, he then noticed, again, similarly, he noticed that there was a cloud in the distance. He was looking outside of his monastery. And he noticed again that this cloud was following the people in the caravan, one after the other. Eventually, the cloud got closer. When this cloud came, this is where the narration differs. At that point in time, Buhaira, according to this narration, he made the preparations for a meal of one person. Or some say he made preparations for more. At that point in time, this is the narration of Allama Majlisi. And then he comes out. And when he comes out, he then says that is there a child among you? He looks for the signs amongst the people. And then he said, I have made some food at that point in time. And he notices that that cloud was just above Rasulullah. That is a young boy, Rasulullah, who was a young man at that point in time, roughly 10 years of old. By the way, the riwayat say physically Rasulullah's age, in terms of his biological age, was 10 or 11 or 12. But the narrations say he physically looked bigger than his age. He looked taller than his age. He looked physically, if he was roughly 12 or 13 years of age, you would think if you saw him, he was 18 or 19 or older than this, because this is how mature he was. Nonetheless, he says at that point in time that I want you to do something. He says that, will you swear by someone? Buhaira is saying to a young Rasulullah. He says, I want you to swear by Lat and Manat and Uzza. If you remember, these were the idols that were in the Kaaba that the idolaters used to worship. At that point in time, Rasulullah, as a young boy, he says, these are the most detested names to me. These are the worst names to me. He says, sign number one. He said, this is a clear sign that this young boy who will come, this final awaited savior of the time, the last prophet, the last messenger, he will not be an idolater. He will be a muwahhid, a monotheist. He says, then I want you to swear by God or Allah, the Lord of the worlds, the one Lord. He says, this is the most beautiful name to me. At that point in time, he's having a conversation with Rasulullah, and Abu Talib, of course, his custodian, his guardian is there. And narrations say either he brought food for one, or he brought food for more. But he definitely did not bring food for 170 people who were in the caravan and the qafila. If you recall, a few weeks ago when we mentioned, Rasulullah was fighting for justice even at a young age. When Bibi Halima Sa'diya, Rasulullah, she would look after Rasulullah when he was on the outskirts of Mecca, being raised in the outskirts. She would look after him like his own child, like her own child. And her own blood children, she would send out to work in the fields. And Rasulullah said, my milk mother, my adopted mother, Bibi Halima, you are not being fair. So what do you mean? He said, my brothers go and work in the fields, they work outside, but I stay at home and you look after me special. It's not fair. At that point in time, Rasulullah stood for justice. Even similarly here. Now there's a principle here, that when this monk offered Rasulullah one plate of food, Rasulullah said, look, an invitation of one to come to the monastery for food to eat. He said, Rasulullah says, I have come with my companions, my comrades, my uncle, my relatives, my people. For me to come alone may not be the most appropriate thing. He says, do you give me permission to bring my guests with me, my colleagues with me, my comrades with me? Look at the justice of Rasulullah. Now, he understood. Rasulullah was well beyond his years. The monk says, according to one narration, he says that I don't have enough food for all these people. I don't have enough food for 170 people. As in, my monastery, I only have very humble means. How am I going to feed 170 people? Rasulullah says, don't worry. Do you give me the permission to invite them? As in, from what food you have prepared for me, from that food only, no extra food, we'll take care of them. Do you just give me the permission that from my share, I am allowed to share with them? Look at the huquq al-nas that Rasulullah is talking about in principle of looking after other people's rights. He didn't say, from my share, I don't need your permission, you've made this for me. He said, no, this is yours, it's a gift and something that you're offering me from the share. Do I have your permission or not? He says, you have my permission. At that point in time, the narration says, according to Alama Majlisi, Rasulullah from his own share, he made sure he gave a portion to each and every person who was in the caravan, in the qafilah. To the point that every single person said that we had not eaten to our fill this entire trip and this entire journey. This was the first time we ate to our fill. Whereas the food did not decrease and no one went hungry. No one got up except they were filled. You will remember, which will come further down the line, Da'wat dhul ashira, where there was just a little bit of food, but everyone was satiated, everyone was filled. This was the barakah of Rasulullah and the Ahlul Bayt. This is what we're going on. Now, given the time, we'll leave that here. This was Sham, where the blessings of Rasulullah came at that point in time. And Rasulullah, Buhaira, the final line, he says to Abu Talib, look after this child and make sure that no one harms him, for verily he is the final awaited messenger who people have been waiting for. And Abu Talib says, verily I have been looking after him in such a way, in such a manner. Nonetheless, this was Sham, this was Abu Talib, this was Rasulullah, this was in the early days, this was before Hijrah. But come to the year of 61 AH, come to the year after Karbala, after Ashura, it is the same family of Rasulullah, the same family of Abu Talib, that when Abu Talib and Rasulullah came years earlier, what happened? The monks of Sham, the monks of Damascus were coming out and bringing food for Rasulullah, were bringing food for Abu Talib. But what happened after Karbala, in Kufa? What happened in Sham? The narration says there was a difference between Kufa and Sham, in the bazaar of Kufa and the bazaar of Sham. What was the difference? The narrations say, according to the narrations, that there was a difference. In Kufa, they were throwing something from the heights, and in Sham, they were throwing something from the heights. But there was a difference between what they were throwing. Azadaro, do you know what they were throwing in Kufa? And do you know what they were throwing in Sham? In Kufa, they were throwing dates, sadaqah dates. They were throwing on the Ahlul Bayt. At that point in time, the Ahlul Bayt were saying, we are Ali Muhammad, we are from the family of Rasulullah. This is haram upon us. How are you throwing this upon us? But do you know what they were throwing in Sham? In Sham, they were not throwing dates that were sadaqah. Do you know what they were throwing? They were throwing burning charcoals of fire on the Ahlul Bayt. They were throwing them towards the children of Ali Muhammad. They would take these charcoals, light them and throw them on the family. There was no one to protect Ali Muhammad. Imam Sajjad was in chains. At that point in time, Azadaro do jumle, बीबी ज़ैनब की क्या हालत होगी, क्या आलम होगा जब यतीमान आले मोहम्मद होंगे और कोटों से अंगारे आ रहे होंगे, किसी बच्चे का दामन जल गया होगा, क्या मुसीबत आई आले मोहम्मद पर। ये एक शाम था जहां रसूल अल्लाह है, और एक ये शाम है जहां ज़ैनब आई है, जहां उम्मे कुलसूम आई है, जहां सकीना आई है। क्या जमाना है, क्या फर्क है। आजादारों, लोगों ने कदर न की। ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، صلى الله عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، خصوصا سيدي ومولاي أبو الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين. Ya Allah, we ask you to bless this gathering. Ya Allah, we ask you to forgive all of our sins. Ya Allah, we ask you to alleviate the suffering of all those who are suffering in terms of their health or wealth or otherwise. Ya Allah, give strength and resilience and harmony to this community. Allow us to heal from the suffering of losing one of our dear loved ones and grant blessings in the lives of the community and strength. Ya Allah, protect all those who served the community before, during and after the program. And Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Imam Sahib al Zaman and allow us to be amongst his companions when he returns. A final request to please recite the Surah Al-Fatiha for the marhumin of the Mirza family, the marhum Mahmoud al-Ta'i, as well as for your marhumin, for our marhumin, and for all those who do not have someone to recite Al-Fatiha for them. Al-Fatiha ma'as salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Bismillah.
توجه زيارة.
زيارة وارثة. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله، السلام عليك يا وارث نوح نبي الله، السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله، السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله، السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله، السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله، السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين ولي الله، السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى، السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء، السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى، السلام عليك يا سار الله وابن ساري والوتر الموتور، أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين، فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرزيت بي. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأسلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تصبلك من متلئمات ثيابها، وأمر أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين، وأنا الإمام البر التقي الرزي الزكي الهادي المهدي، وأشهد أنك الأيمن من ولد كلمة التقوى وعلام الهدى والغروة الوسكى والحجة على أهل الدنيا وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبيا بكم موقن بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. زيارة الأكبر. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد، السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد، السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرزيت به. زيارة شهداء كربلاء. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباء، السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأبداء، السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله، السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله، السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدتي نساء العالمين، السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الزكي الناسي، السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي بن الله بأبي أنتم وأمي تبتم وطابت الأرض فيها فوزتم فوزا عظيما، فيا ليتني كنت معكم فافوز معكم. زيارة قمر بني هاشم. السلام عليك يا عباس بن أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوسيين. لعن الله من قتلك ولعن الله من ظلمك ولعن الله من جيل حقك واستخف بحرمتي ولعن الله من حال بينك وبين ماء الفرات. أشهد أنك قتلت مظلوما بأبي أنت وأمي يا ناصر دين الله. السلام عليك يا ناصر الحسين الصديق، عليك مني السلام ما بكيت وبكي الليل والنهار. السلام عليك وعلى أختك زينب وبنتك سكينة جميع رحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا غريب الغرباء السلطان أبا الحسن مولانا علي بن موسى الرضا، كن شفيعنا وشفيع والدينا في يوم الجزاء، وفقر الله زيارتك يا مولانا، ورزقنا الله شفاعتك في الدنيا والآخرة. السلام عليك وعلى أختك فاطمة المعصومة جميع رحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب الزمان سيدي الأمان الأمان الأمان. السلام عليك يا كامة الإيمان، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان، ورحمة الله وبركاته. بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات.